Welcome. My name's Ben Salt, and I'm the General Manager of Platform and Reliability for Xero. That's me. So I'm going to be talking today about our DevOps evolution at Xero and how we transitioned from being a startup to innovating in the cloud at scale, and what we've learned along the way. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the cultural changes that have allowed us to keep delivering business value at startup speed. So who is Xero? Xero was founded in 2006 by a guy called Rod Drury and a handful of others to address what we perceived was a gap in the accounting market. So we combined the flexibility and convenience of the cloud, and that's been a great success for us. And today we're the leading cloud-based accounting platform for small businesses and their advisors. We have over 1.58 million subscribers in more than 180 countries connected to our platform. The growth of subscribers at Xero, this is sort of a graph that shows what our growth has looked like from 2009 through to 2017. And back in 2017, or actually March 18 it was, we had 1.386 million paying subscribers. So you'll see we sort of grew from a few hundred subscribers to over 1 million just in the course of 10 years. And that presents some unique challenges when you're trying to build at scale. So I'd like to talk a little bit about our foundations and set the scene for this. So it's 2013. In January of that year, Xero migrated to what we called our V4 platform in a hosted data center. And we moved off a shared SAN offering in that data center onto a dedicated SAN. By March, the SAN that we had selected was too small. So we moved up to the next SAN in that family. We outgrew that one by July. And then we embarked on our final SAN migration for 2013. So if you've been keeping count, that's 3 SANs in 1 year. So we were really good at migrating data. And that was because we were growing so massively through that 2013 year. And we knew that doing SAN upgrades, 3 SAN upgrades every year was not really going to be a long-term thing for us. So we started planning our move to a public cloud provider. If you were a customer of Xero back in 2013, you may also remember that we had what we called a release Monday. And that meant we took our entire site offline for a couple of hours on Monday, about 6 a.m., got everyone in who was involved in that release, we released some software, and then we were back up. And then 3 weeks later, we'd rinse and repeat the same thing. That's not super agile. So we decided to take the great leap and migrate Xero onto the AWS platform. We signed with AWS in late 2013, and we immediately got to work planning our migration. We drew staff in from both our product and operations to form our migration team. So we had about 26 staff in total working on this migration. And we tasked them with building a new platform and designing our new application architecture in the cloud. And we knew immediately that there was a significant knowledge gap between the activities previously undertaken in the physical data center and those that would be needed in the cloud. So we worked with AWS to create targeted learning plans, provided training materials and workshops, and lastly, AWS was very kind to place a solution architect on site to help us with our migration. We also knew that DevOps is characterized by agile behaviors, so we sent one manager on an agile course with the aim that they would become the trainer for the rest of the team. We'd now realised that we were drawing significant numbers of existing operations staff into our migration team and reduced the original team's ability to support the legacy production environment, which was at the time still in our physical data centre, still hosting 100% of our customers. And we were still releasing an entire new version of Xero every 3 weeks. To mitigate that, we decided to conduct an experiment which was intended to reduce our product team's dependencies on operational support. We decided to try on the idea of an autonomous team. At the same time, to cope with a reduced operations team, we needed to shed some workload. This meant making some hard calls about what we built and ran internally, and versus what we used a third-party provider for. And being a SaaS company, using SaaS software came naturally to us. So monitoring and logging were moved off to SaaS providers, such as Relic, to reduce the operations workload to run, rather than build, patch, run, and update. So we used to do it all internally. And we had to get rid of that so we could focus on what we do for our business. So what is an autonomous team? The autonomous team concept is taken from command and control systems used by various military groups across history. The key element in command and control is devolved decision making. And the theory is that those on the ground When well informed and cognizant of the overarching strategy, now I can't hammer home how important it is that you are cognizant of the overarching strategy here, they're more capable of making good tactical choices than an officer is in preloading them with all the possible outcomes in advance. Another aspect of autonomous teams is the capability of rapid decision making, where hierarchical system decisions need to be referred upward for approval. In command and control, it is assumed the individual on the ground has the best amount of knowledge to make the choice locally. So we created our first experimental autonomous team with these two simple initiatives. With embedded operations, we took a member of the operations team and embedded them into a large product team, and that provided their expert infrastructure advice and guidance to the team rapidly. It also allowed this operations person to become familiar with the ins and outs of development work. We also, when it came to release ownership, we handed the deployment of these releases over to that same large product team. Previously, they'd been building code, they'd been creating a deployable and throwing it over the wall to operations to deploy. And we provided that team with some in-depth training on what it means to deploy to live. And suddenly, this product team had the ability to deploy its own releases on its own schedule. And boy, did they love that newfound autonomy. So it's been a while since we've set up the autonomous team experiment, and some months had passed. 2014 had rolled in, and our migration team migrating to AWS was not delivering the anticipated results at the anticipated speed. AWS refer to this as the Great Stall, and it affects about 60% of all mass migrations to the cloud. It's a combination of cultural issues, rate of change, risk awareness, and a skills gap. It was a significant risk in terms of expenditure for us. We were running up costs in our new cloud environment and still paying production bills from the legacy data center where our customers still resided. We wanted to fix this problem and fix it fast. So we held what we call our first real introspection. At Xero, we're great believers in making evidence-based decisions. So we decided to take an information gathering approach to the problem to see what the data would tell us. We sent out surveys to our staff, operations, product and migration, and asked them what they thought was wrong and how they would fix it. We reviewed ticket logs, work items, to identify problem examples, and we consulted with AWS and other subject matter experts. We analysed all that collated information and we reached two significant conclusions. The first is that Agile is not a tool. It's a methodology and it's only as good as the understanding of its practitioners. When the team does not understand what the choices are available to them, there is little ability to adapt and failure is likely. We put everyone in our migration team through an Agile Fundamentals course, and we hired an Agile team facilitator and embedded them with the migration team. The other conclusion we reached was that large teams fail slowly, and that's related to the theory of relational loss. Relational loss occurs as groups get bigger and bigger and bigger, and the individuals inside them are unable to maintain meaningful conversations with everyone. More communication is not the answer in this case. The size of the team needs to change. Jeff Bezos calls this the two-pizza team rule, where, as he explains it, the team should be small enough that can be fed with 2 pizzas. So we took our migration team of 26 people and we broke it down into 5 two-pizza teams. We collectively named these teams Platform as a Service, and they were our automation, data, networks, tools, and security teams. And I think we got that right because those 5 teams still exist at Xero today. Security has grown and split into a further 3 teams, and our data team is sort of split out into a few further specialties. But the same core functions are the same as they were in 2014. The migration teams, now known as Platform as a Service, were in full swing by mid-2015 and delivering steadily towards our new platform. But the legacy operation team were reporting increasing problems. Recall that they were still supporting our legacy production environment, which was still in our physical data center. We were still 100% in that data center, and we were still releasing an entire new version of Xero every 3 weeks. Though, while we were doing 3 weekly releases, these were silent now, so they required no downtime. So we were getting a bit better in that release space. And we still only had that one product team that was truly autonomous and could release whenever they liked. We reviewed the issues being experienced in production and could see that operations were struggling to keep abreast of the work. We could observe that both functional and non-functional issues were starting to creep in. Some 3 weekly releases were skipped entirely because testing couldn't be satisfactorily completed in time, and the releases themselves were becoming less feature-rich than they had been in the past. And with the reduced number of operations team, they were unable to keep up support for those non-autonomous teams, so they were becoming the bottleneck. So we conducted another introspection to see what could be done. We reviewed the feedback from our autonomous team experiment, and we saw that the product team in that experiment was significantly less dependent on the central team for support because if something went wrong, they had a local operations person to sort it out. In fact, their tickets had almost dried up overnight. The product team was able to roll more comprehensive features in their releases because they could iterate faster. Everyone agreed it had been a resounding success. And just let me stress again how happy the product teams were with this autonomy. They were very, very happy. And we reached the decision that product teams should all become autonomous. To achieve this, we simply extended the distributed model that we trialled earlier. We took out more operations staff and embedded them into product teams, and the large product teams received an engineer each, and our smaller ones received a pool of embedded ops people. We conducted widespread training and gave the deployment of the releases into their keeping, and that was a scary moment because we hadn't really done that up until now. It also became clear toward the end of 2015 that operations as we knew it could not continue in this us versus them model. First of all, we just decimated our operations team by moving them into embedded ops, moving them into the migration. We were primarily focused on looking after test and UAT environments, which is just so boring. We suffered from taking manual approaches to problem solving, like logging into servers to apply patches. This was not going to scale once we were in AWS. The traditional way of working was becoming untenable for them. During our second introspection, we discovered that ops felt there was no ownership but all the responsibility of maintaining the environment where product teams owned their own deployment test processes. It was a classic them versus us divide that had come back to haunt us. Operations staff were rapidly becoming disenfranchised. We consulted internally and researched what other companies who operate in the cloud do for operations teams and made some surprising discoveries that resulted in implementing a new model for operations in 2016. So by the beginning of April 2016, we'd planned our migration of live customers into AWS. Our migration started for real in April, and it was time to coincide with the migration. We implemented our new model for operations, which was site reliability engineering. Site reliability engineering was conceived by Google, and a PDF is available online for free. SRE is all about applying software engineering principles to operational problems. It promotes the automation of mundane tasks and prefers systems to be self-healing and scale on demand. An SRE engineer will monitor production systems to ensure they are available and performant. They provide on-call and online support for the production environment 24/7 every day of the year. The key difference between SRE and legacy operations is one of system ownership. With autonomous teams making their own choices and iterating rapidly, it's not feasible to expect a single team to keep up with that workload. The pivotal distinctions that enable SRE's successes are measure and assess. You do not judge and enforce when you're an SRE, and that's a bit different from how operations used to be. Therefore, we tend to build and maintain tools that allow for measurement and assessment. And we kind of look at this like a reporting function, and that's where we rely on New Relic a lot. They help us out with that measure and assess function. We document our service level objectives with product teams. Again, we surface that information into New Relic. And that includes monitoring the availability of product teams and products. We maintain an error budget for all of our product teams, which is a function of the service level objective, and we can stop a product team deploying if they've blown their error budget. We look after the demand forecasting and capacity planning. You might not think you need it in an AWS environment, but you do want to keep an eye on it from a cost point of view. And we decentralize the location of SRE, and we try and place our site reliability engineers near our developers. I often get asked how we implemented SRE, because a lot of people aspire to do this but don't know where to start. This is a hierarchy of production needs, which is based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and starts with the most basic needs at the bottom and slowly works its way up to the most advanced needs. Monitoring is the foundational layer here. Without monitoring of our software, we are flying blind. It's important not to conflate monitoring with alerting, and just because you get lots of alerts doesn't mean you're monitoring anything useful. With an SRE focus, we tend to monitor and alert on service level objective thresholds, getting close to breaching and breaching. This means very few alerts for us generally. Incident response covers how we respond in an emergency situation. The best solution here is to have strong process and solid troubleshooting documentation. Xero has written a bit about how we do this in our developer blog, and we recently presented at SRECon 18 in Asia on the topic as well. Post-mortem and root cause analysis are key to learn from your incidents. Failure to learn means that we're doomed to repeat our mistakes. Post-mortems help us not only improve our products, but the processes that we use to run the incidents and the post-mortem themselves. Testing and release procedures. Once we have learnt from our mistakes, we try to put a test or tests in place to prevent them from reoccurring. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Capacity planning is about more than just throwing disk or RAM at a problem. It's how to address your load, overload, moving load around, and dealing with things like cascading failure in a microservices environment. Development is where we start to work on the actual hard problems to solve, like distributed consensus or how to build highly available systems. And when you get to the very point of that pyramid at product, this is where you have the headspace to focus on product delivering great customer value. And don't get complacent when you look at this. This is not something that you'll achieve in 1 year. But back to my point, where did we start with this at Xero? For us, incident management was where we needed to start. We had reasonable monitoring coverage. We were using New Relic. But our incident management processes existed from our operations days. They were seldom followed or understood due to the context switching required between the documentation, our ticketing tooling, and our chat tool, where an incident usually went down. Additionally, the autonomous teams expected that we would participate in incidents to help with resolution. And as they comprised mostly of developers, they had even less to do with incident management than the SRE team had. To help with this, Xero's SRE team developed a chatbot named Multivac, which acts primarily as an automated incident management framework. Multivac simplifies our on-call onboarding process and provides a guided experience during production incidents. And it reliably manages our external communications and escalations. We've got more detail on how we manage our incidents and Multivac works in our dev blog. The arrival of Multivac signalled a change in organisational maturity, and it was a really formative time for the company. We were committed to DevOps, committed to our migration. We'd made some small false steps, but we'd experimented as a team and had started to grow to a new beginning. Product teams were in love with the freedoms of autonomy, operations had dissolved into embedded operations, platform as a service, and site reliability engineering. Everyone was coming up to speed, and by the beginning of 2016, our AWS platform was nearing ready. It was time to kick our migration into gear. We took 9 months to migrate our application from the physical data center into the cloud, which I think is pretty impressive considering we also re-architected in flight to take advantage of the new and different options in AWS. Our migration was done in waves, each wave to a week with data syncing starting on Monday, with the final sync being performed on a Saturday or a Sunday during some planned downtime for those customers. We started in small batch sizes, 100 customers 1 week, 1,000 the next, to test and improve our processes. Then we got bigger as we got better. We did 10,000, 50,000, 100,000, with a final wave of nearly 200,000 customers. This was a great example of the DevOps culture in Xero at action. Waves were run by small teams of 4 to 5 staff. They had all the people in them that they needed to do the work. Each team was on for a wave, then off for 2 weeks, or off for 2 waves. After every wave, a retrospective occurred and process improvements were subsequently noted and made. During this process, we moved over 700,000 customers. We transferred 1.4 petabytes of data. We had minimum disruption to service and no data loss. We continued to release features throughout and had a fair bit of pizza as well. So post-migration and through into 2017, we spent a bit of time bedding down our organisational and application changes we'd made through the migration. It had been a disruptive time and we needed a bit of breathing space. Toward the end of 2017, however, we started to see new types of problem arise. An increasing amount of complexity was leading to stability issues, and increasing technical debt was leading to more complexity. We'd had such good outcomes from our previous forays that we decided to conduct our third and most recent introspection. Reviewing the data revealed that the increasing tech debt and complexity both had their roots in a common cause, the autonomous team. Autonomy had been misunderstood as the freedom to do anything, rather than autonomous when well informed and cognizant of the overarching strategy. Teams were inventing the same solutions independently with varying degrees of quality. It was a big time waster and a huge component of technical debt. What were we going to do about it? We decided to try 2 new initiatives off the back of the data we'd collected and in our most recent introspection. The first of these was about balancing our priorities. Because autonomous teams were responsible for their availability and performance of the systems that run in production, those product teams were prioritising features over their non-functional work, such as reliability or cost-effectiveness, when the non-functional work piling up in a corner. The second initiative was to create a space for experiments. By identifying the attributes that led to new solutions being created, we noticed 2 things. New technology adoption was a frequent factor in amassing new technical debt, and new technology adoption almost exclusively focused on a solution, not a set of outcomes. By not focusing on a set of outcomes, we were taking our eye off the customer need and want. The good news is that most product teams had self-identified this, and we were engaged in understanding how we could correct this. As always at Xero, we treat problems as an opportunity to improve. Rather than fret about the problem, we ask, how did we get here? What were the signs, and how can we improve? By creating space for experiments, we had some guidelines around what is considered an experiment and could control the resourcing of that. We also tried to focus the experiment on an outcome, i.e., what would the customer get from this? This was because we realised the customer doesn't tend to care about the JavaScript framework that we use, but does care about whether or not it's a beautiful experience to create and send an invoice. The second initiative from our most recent introspection is actually a collection of mechanisms that are intended to improve discoverability. Transparent working is achieved through surfacing information and promotion of collaboration in order to help autonomous teams make better informed decisions. The key elements were workflow visibility through quarterly planning, making sure our issues were in source code, and teams being requested to share their work in progress. Having minimum viable documentation, so design requirements, decision and support detail must be recorded and published to a minimum acceptable standard. We try to keep this in GitHub for the most part. Accessible engagement. Teams are requested to advertise the ways in which they can be engaged with and to publish details of how to add work to their backlogs. And an internal open source. Virtual teams are loosely formed around a shared interest or project. The idea is that disparate teams can collaborate on a solution and fork the source code if alterations are required. And the last one was assistance bots. By adding chatbots into Slack with the logic to direct simple questions to the appropriate subject matter expert. At this time, we're still monitoring these initiatives to see how effective they are and what changes we may yet need to make. The continuing consultation with staff and experts, the examination of evidence led to direct organisational change. These things have been instrumental in guiding us towards a true DevOps culture. We've been able to build transparency from data-driven decisions, building confidence as insights derived from evidence, improving our collaboration, and building trust within and across teams. So in conclusion, to wrap up, I'd like to provide a quick summary of what we've learned and what I believe enables Xero to continue delivering business value at startup speed today. DevOps is not a team. It's a culture that depends on collaboration. Agile is not a tool. It's a methodology that needs to be understood by all those who practice it. 2 pizza teams are the most effective size. Autonomous teams can iterate better and faster. And site reliability engineering is what I believe is the natural complement to those autonomous teams. And transparent working supports fast and effective decision making. DevOps is a journey. It's about continuous improvement. It is not something that you can just implement overnight. It requires buy-in from the top level of your organisation to be successful. Deciding to adopt DevOps is deciding that a cultural change is required in your organisation. Thank you.